Professor Ramamurthy, Director, National Institute of Advanced Science, Program Chair, Professor Rajshekharan Pillai, His Excellency, Mr. Prasad Karyavasam, the Vice Chancellor of Delhi University, Professor Dinesh Singh, Vice Chancellor Dr. Pankaj Mittalji, distinguished invitees, friends from the print and visual media, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me first thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to chair this very important session. I think Mr. Kapil Sibbalji, in his morning address, has in fact covered a lot of ground on why the new knowledge has to be created for solving the global interconnected new problems of climate change and the like, and the need for collaboration in this interconnected global village in which we are living. Thanks to the investments made in 50s and 60s, India had developed a knowledge base which is recognized by the world. In fact, the Global Governance Report 2025, which came after NIC's 2008 report, which was jointly issued by National Intelligence Council and Directorate of and the EU's Institute of Security Studies, says that India will be the third most powerful country by 2025. By 2025, US will still be having 18%, if there is a way to measure power, 18% power, followed by China 16%, European Union 11%, and India 10%. That's why I said third most powerful, because European Union, as you know, is a conglomerate of over 20, I think 28 or 29 countries now. I lose count. Because of this knowledge base, India has been invited to participate in very prestigious global projects such as ITER, International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, where 8 countries are contributing to commercialize how to have the same energy which Lord Sun produces day in and day out, that is fusion energy. India also has been collaborating, our ISRO has been collaborating with the European Space Agency, NASA, etc. Plus, you're all aware of what kind of contribution our scientists have made to Hadron Collider experiment at CERN. Our technologists, management experts are at the helm of affairs in almost all the 500 Fortune companies. And also, I think if you go to any of these Ivy League or top-ranking educational institutions, we find our Indians in the top ranks. We managed 9% growth before the economic slowdown, and rather economic meltdown, and even during that period we managed to keep our head high, have over 6% growth, and in this last quarter, the latest one, we have clocked 7.8%, and before that, the earlier 2 quarters were 8.8%. Now, this conventional time series indicates that about 8 to 8.5% is perhaps a growth rate which we can achieve if things are done as usual. But for our country to sustain and our society to sustain itself, and if social fabric has to be maintained and further strengthened, 10% growth rate is required. Of course, there were some indications by Professor Rangarajan that 10% or above may also bring in inflationary pressures. But I think overall, around 10% is what is desirable. Now, there are 3 important imperatives to my mind if this growth has to be kept and maintained on a sustainable basis. the growth has to be much more inclusive, and we have to improve our governance. Unfortunately, I think in the governance, there is a World Bank kind of a index on governance where we are at 46th percentile in 210 countries, which means out of 210 countries, we are, at least 50% of countries are better than us in governance. And we have to develop leadership in various areas, be it managerial leadership, corporate leadership, political leadership, social leadership, educational leadership. All those are required. We have demography on our side. I think 20 to 59 years, we have 49%. 49% was said in year 2000, and now it will become 53% in 2050. Our dependency ratio is only 12% and is likely to remain around the same even after another 15, 20 years or 30 years. Whereas in Japan, the dependency ratio, which was 30% in 2005, is likely to become 70%. That means almost 1.5 persons would take care of one old person there. And in European Union, it is 26%, which will become 53%. Why there is a need for global cooperation? I think in another 25, 30 years, it is estimated that OECD countries would have a shortfall of over 35 to 40 million people as a workforce, and even China will have a shortfall of about the same level, while India will create a workforce of another 120 million or so during that period, another 30 years. But we can perhaps meet 20 to 30 million out of this shortfall. But that can happen only if we are able to train and give skills to our people, educate them. Now, it obviously means that our growth has to be inclusive and it should be job-oriented. If it is not job-oriented, what will happen to our youth? They will get frustrated and they might be tempted to join the ranks of antisocial elements such as extremists, etc. Our GR, as you know, is about 15% as told by the minister in the morning. But of course, it could be a little higher because our data is slightly old. And in the next 10 years or so, we have to achieve another 15% according to the minister. But at least even if we achieve 10%, that would be a very good thing. The Prime Minister has been saying that for too long we have treated our population as an economic and social liability. A well-educated, skilled and healthy population is an asset. And the challenge for all of us is to make this as an asset. Now today during this discussion, of course, while we have to talk of the global cooperation, but primarily, I think we have to see the imperatives for growth in India and how we can collaborate with other nations to see that this growth takes place the way we have talked about. At no point in human history was the welfare of nations so closely linked to the quality and outreach of its higher education systems or institutions. This is what UNESCO said in one of their higher education summits. And the three pillars of higher education, access, equity, and excellence, and perhaps the efficiency of the system, we would be dealing today. Now we spend hardly 3.5% of the GDP on our education, whereas even countries like Lesotho, Cuba, Botswana, they spend 14% of their GDP on education. Of course, Malaysia spends around 8%. So there are many countries which spend much more than the 6% target which we have fixed for ourselves. And that 6% was fixed a long time back. Unfortunately, what we find, we had touched around 4.2% of the GDP in the year 2000, but then the states have somehow reduced their spending on education by almost 0.92% of the GDP in the last 10 years. So today, while states have reduced their spending, Government of India's spending on education has gone up by 0.42% of the GDP. Now, if you have to achieve the 6%, while Government of India has been increasing their spend on education, I think the states will have to increase their budgets. By a rough calculation, it shows at least 3 times of what they are spending today. If they were to do that, then maybe we'll come close to 6%, which is desirable. Unfortunately, there is also an issue of capacity building in the educational institutions. While the Government of India increased its budget by almost 10 times of what we spent in the last 5-year plan, 85,000 crores was allocated, but unfortunately we find today, this year is the last year of the plan, that we have been able to spend only about 55% or so of that money which was supposed to have been spent on higher education. Of course, the entire fault cannot lay at the door of our educationists because the entire money was not allocated. But then I think the allocation and spending go hand in hand. If you spend well, you get more allocation. If you, at times, it's a chicken and egg situation. So in any case, I think there is a need for capacity building. We have created 14 lakh capacity in our engineering colleges, intake capacity. In fact, it is the highest in the world. But then what has happened because of lack of quality, perhaps in some of the institutions, about 10 to 15% of the seats are vacant. It's again a very serious issue. And we have very high disparities. While in Bihar, this is maybe 2-3-year-old figure, 1.86 per lakh of population is the intake capacity in Bihar, in engineering colleges, while it is 162 in Tamil Nadu. See the variance. Now, keeping all this in mind, I think there has to be convergence between the conventional system of education and the open and distance learning, because the conventional system has a lot of infrastructure and facilities, and the ODL, open and distance learning, has a lot of flexibility. We have to see that there is a convergence while maintaining the quality. The technology cannot teach. It can only enable the teacher to do well, and it will facilitate and make it a little more interesting than, I think, this 100% cutoff which Minister mentioned is also perhaps one of the reasons that we need more institutions, more access, and that to quality institutions. The transition rates are the rates between, say, upper primary to secondary, secondary to higher secondary, and higher secondary to higher education. Now, these transition rates also are comparatively low. They are around 50%. Now, that means at every stage, we lose about 50% of the people who do not go to the higher stage. In fact, between secondary to higher secondary, I think it's very low. It's of the order of 30% only, I am told. So we have to improve these rates if the GR has to be pushed up to by another 10% or so. Now, vocational education, unfortunately, is very fragmented in the country. I am aware one of the reasons perhaps is that vocational education is not preferred or is not sort of that much pursued, is perhaps the respect society has for vocational education. The blue-collar jobs are not that much respected. Now, we have to create that respect.